So hello, everyone, to Confectionery Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm the host of this panel on sustainability reporting from the farm to the factory to the artisan workshop. I'm joined today by three guests. I want to introduce to you Julia Ocampo, who is the Director of Sustainability of Lucre Chocolates from Colombia. Right. Also joining me today is Andres Guzman, who's the co-founder and CEO of Hacienda Victoria in Ecuador, and then also Wayne Gregory of Wayne Gregory Chocolates in the UK. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for joining me here today for this panel session on Confectionery Live. So when we think about sustainability reporting, or we think about ESG reporting, right, normally we're thinking about something which is very highly regulatory. There are forms we need to follow. There are specific things we need to talk about, right? But each of you has a responsibility to your customers to talk about sustainability. And what I want to focus on today is the notion of confidence. So how can you be confident that the information that you're providing to your customers is in fact accurate and clear? And how does the web of relationships working from the cacao farmer in Ecuador in this case, right, to the cocoa processor and chocolate maker in Colombia in this case, to the chocolatier, right, in the United Kingdom in this case? And Andres, I want to start with you. We had a discussion before we started the panel today about how you as a cocoa bean producer, how the way you communicate with customers is different depending upon where they are in the world. So can you tell me, for example, what is it that a European customer is looking for, again, in terms of sustainability reporting? How are they different from what the Americans might be looking for, or from what a client in Japan might be looking for?
So hello, everyone, and thanks, Clay. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, in terms of sustainability, when you're talking to a European customer and to all customers, the first thing is transparency. You have to be very transparent with the information on what you're doing in terms of sustainability. And the European customer is always looking more in terms right now of, deforestation, child labor. Those are things that they really focus on. And also at the moment in terms of cadmium and heavy metals. So we have to do some compliance. We have to do some bean testing. We have to be very worried about that. And with the new regulations on the European Union in terms of deforestation, we have to comply that there hasn't been no deforestation after 2020. So
can I jump in here real quickly? Are there corresponding regulations in Ecuador set up, or is there a move towards having sort of a harmonization of regulations in Europe and Ecuadorian law, which are going to make this compliance easier or maybe even harder compared with what you need to do for European clients?
Well, it's funny because we just reached out to the Minister of Environment 3 months ago because of the regulation that was coming in. There's still some confusion if people will take in from 2014 or for 2020. We decided to go from 2014, which is a older date. And actually, we asked the Minister of Environment to develop a research and a report about our farm in terms of deforestation. So this is actually the first report in Ecuador that analyzes this in the sense of what is European market asking. So I think the tools are there in order to create transparency, in order to audit your plantation and to comply with that in regards of what Europe is trying to look for in the future in that sense. You were asking about other markets as well. The Japanese market is also looks for some of these, but things different that they ask is a lot about 2,4-D residue, which is a chemical residue, and it's something that they are always consistently asking for. So we have to do testing of the containers every time we ship. And then for our the American market, they focus a lot on what work are we doing through the community. So working with schools, we're working with the people that are surround the community, and now also, especially in California with Prop 65, the cadmium levels, which the US is actually becoming even more strict than the Europeans in terms of cadmium levels. And then the new thing that is coming is lead. So lead is another thing that we're going to have to worry about.
Okay. So, Julia, you occupy this middle ground. I mean, I know that I was in Colombia in 2022. I had a chance to visit farms and programs that Lucre is involved with on the ground. So, as a cocoa processor, you're not growing your own cocoa, as near as I recall, and you're producing chocolate for consumption by companies around the world. What are the most important concerns that you have and the ones that have been the most challenging for Lucre to resolve?
Yeah, hi everybody. So as you say, so we are a company that are focused also in the sustainability results. So for us, it is very important to have like our chocolate dream, that is our sustainability plan, so that we work with a long-term vision. And the most important issues we work in are to protect the environment, to increase the income in the communities. So the farmers where we work, we buy the cocoa, they're really small farmers. We work increasing the income from these communities, and also prioritizing the protection of the children, the women, the young people across Colombia, and also all the environment around the places we buy the cocoa. We have our own plantations, because you say that we don't have it. We have our own plantations. They're really small according to the percentage we buy in cocoa in Colombia. So from our own plantations, we have less than 2% of our cocoa. We use these plantations more like an anchor crop, so that we can work with the farmers that are around our own plantations to show them how they can produce cocoa and how they can have higher productivity, or they can solve the problems around social innovation, and we can work together in sustainable practices between all the farmers.
Can I jump in there and ask an interesting question as a follow-up to one of the things that Andres said? So he said that Europeans customers are looking for perhaps different information than American customers, than perhaps Japanese customers are. So when you're communicating with your clients in these countries, it's the same basic information, it's the same basic stories, but what are people looking at from you that might be different from different parts of the world?
I think each client is very different, so all clients are different, and one of the important topics is the geographic situation. Yes, of course, it's very different between USA, Japan, or the European Union, but it's also about the segment and about the size of the brand and the focus of the purpose. So, for example, we have plant-based chocolate clients, and they're more interested in environmental issues. We have industrial clients that are very focused on price, traceability down to farmer, or we have retailers who want to support their claims, and it is very useful, all the data information that we can give in a ESG report. But the more different are the brand owners, because each brand owner, they have a purpose that is very different. So for example, we will have one that will be direct trade, or slave free, or deforestation. So of course it is very important, so that the communication can be useful for everybody. But the most important thing is to have the transparency, and the to be confident, as you said, so that we can show the information very simple and just share what we do.
So one of the things that leading into, so Paul, I want you to pay attention to this because you're answering this even though I'm responding to Julia right now. So it seems to me that as a customer, one of the things that I need to be is I need to be proactive in terms of asking my suppliers for the information that I want and that I need, right? So I need to be going there and saying, well, I want, for example, a certificate of analysis, or I need this kind of technical data sheet on this and that and the other. So Paul, you're buying chocolate, you're buying other ingredients, you're making confectionery and baked goods in the UK. Have you really spent much time and attention thinking about, oh, what kind of information do I need to get from, like, do I need to ask my suppliers for? Right? Has that been a part of your business? And the second part of this is, how has the sort of COVID pause, I mean, the last 2 years, how has it affected the way you're thinking about doing this in the future?
Okay. Well, first of all, good evening. Pleasure to be here. I'll answer back and forth between the two questions you asked, because COVID was actually, I shouldn't really say it, but it was a blessing in some ways because it allowed everything to pause. So we was able to restructure and get the information that we needed from the companies and spend the time to actually analyze the information, concile the information together, and then give it back out to the general public. Also, as well, the questions that the clients are asking has changed since COVID. I think people were home and they had time to research, they had time to think, they had time to think about what they're putting into their bodies, think about what they're consuming. And now they're asking different types of questions. So we have to stay ahead of them by gathering for more information from our suppliers.
So let me jump in there and say, what is an example of a question that customers are asked? I mean, specific question, not a general question. What's a kind of specific question around this notion of either sustainability or transparency or traceability? What kinds of questions, one specifically, are your customers asking you now that they weren't asking you 2 years ago?
Yeah. So I'll give an example. So before people, sustainability, people was more asking about child slavery. Is it fair trade? Those kind of questions before the pandemic. Since the pandemic, people are going more into, do you know the farmer? What's the farmer's name? They're going more in depth and down to ingredients and cross-contamination and these kind of questions they're asking now, and the actual makeup of what's in the chocolate. What types of sugars, yes, we know the origin of the cocoa might come from Ecuador, but what part of Ecuador? What's the farmer? Is it mixed? Is it a single origin? And they're asking more in-depth questions, which is great for us, because the more information that they ask, the more information we can give out, and the better it is for the general knowledge of the public.
So, I mean, in the United States, in the last month, there's been a big hoo-hoo-rah around heavy metals contamination. There was an article posted in Consumer Reports for people who may know it. And as a matter of fact, I have a panel presentation about communicating responsibly about heavy metals contamination, which is based upon sort of this report going viral here in the United States. So for you, Julia, and then for you, Andres, and then we'll get back to you, Paul. What is the biggest challenge for you in terms of addressing heavy metals contamination, right? Julia, I mean, Colombia is a mountainous region. We would think that there would be, therefore, a lot of volcanic soils. We'd see that cadmium contamination would be an issue. Is it, how big of an issue is it for you? And then Andres, you have a similar kind of, challenge, not where you are necessarily in YS, but in Ecuador in general. So where is that, and how do you see communicating around the lead issue so that, again, I, as a consumer of a chocolate bar, can feel good about the chocolate that I'm eating?
Clay, this is a very, very hard question because it's very difficult to explain the farmers that it's because of the soil that they have a heavy metal. So the way is that just that we cannot buy this cocoa from these farmers because when it is very high, it is difficult so that to have it in the factory. And so we prefer to work with the farmers in the places where we have low cadmium. We have already really the data from a very long term. And so we prefer to promote new plantations and increase productivity in the places where low cadmium is the result. So we are working a lot mostly in the sustainable dream. In the chocolate dream, we are working with farmers that are in low cadmium, and then we are working in the industry to take out the cadmium particles during the process, so that we can take it out, and have a very good chocolate result. This is something we are going to patent in some days.
So you are working on mechanisms to be able to extract the cadmium in the chocolate in the factory, right? So yes. Obviously what we want to do is we want to minimize the amount of cadmium uptake in the soil, and there are agricultural practices that can be done to do that. But at some point, in the factory, is there a way to go about doing that? So Andres, I visited the Hacienda Victoria in October, and you have some really, really interesting agricultural practices on the farm. So how do you, and you've become, I think, the first carbon neutral certified cocoa farm in the world. How does Hacienda Victoria communicate around the issue of heavy metals, and how has that changed over the course of the last couple of years? I mean, if it's a problem for you in the fields.
Yeah, well, we have been working measuring cadmium levels in our farm for maybe 4 years now. Mm-hmm. So locally in Hacienda Victoria, we have it under control, and our cadmium levels are very low, below what the regulation says. And I do have to make a parenthesis though. Either if you are, in accordance with the regulation or not, because that's another thing. I mean, the regulation is there, and it's there to obey it. Okay. The problem here is that the negative impact of this is really hurting the small farmers. So right. How can we help the small farmers come through solutions? So we have been cooperating with 2 universities in Europe at the moment for the last 2 years, trying to find a solution on how to go lower in cadmium levels. So at the moment, I think the most promising one that should be publicated by the end of this year is a low-cost methodology during fermentation that will reduce cadmium levels to half. Wow. So I'm happy to listen to Julia in terms of also they're worrying in the chocolate. I know there's a lot of things that people are worrying and trying to look for solutions. Mm-hmm. But at the end, I mean, the complicated individual here is the small farmer, and that's what we have to worry about.
Okay. So, Paul, I mean, one of the things that, comes out of this, and, I'm focusing on heavy metals right now because it's top of mind here in the United States, but it represents only a small bit of the entire communications challenge, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, if I'm using an ingredient that you purchase and might be perhaps slightly higher, but that you're using it as an ingredient, and that when you add all these other things, when it comes to a serving, right, mm-hmm. you have levels which below. So are these things, number one, which you've ever had to consider before in terms of recipe development, right? Mm-hmm. And if somebody comes and asks you the question, how do you think you responsibly need to respond to them on this issue?
Yeah. So this issue now for us is a new issue. It's brand new. So a lot of chocolatiers and people in the industry don't really know how to address it. I'm lucky as in to say I get all my specs from the main company. We're quite a bit safer on this particular subject being a chocolatier because we have 2 fields for it to go through. So you have to go through the grower and then the manufacturer of the chocolate before it gets to us. So they're checking levels before it even gets to us. So 9 times out of 10, we're fine. But as you said, there's cases in America now where things have filtered through and got to the customer. So we have to now address this. So getting the specification from the manufacturer is the most important thing. Once we've got that, then we can look at it and then, as you say, develop the recipe. But so far, touch wood, we've been lucky where it hasn't affected the recipes. As you say, by the time we add flavorings to it and so on, when I mean flavorings, I mean cream and non-dairies and whatever, passion fruit, so on and so forth, to create the end product. There hasn't been that high level of metals. So, as I said, it's very new. So we're just still in that baby stage.
So let me ask a question of you, Paul, and Andres and Julia. I don't think it directly, right? You want to answer it in the same way, but I want to see if there is a parallel in Ecuador and Colombia for this, which is, to what extent, Paul, I mean, the UK is known for having just this excellent farm-to-table food movement. There are people who now say, listen, London, I know London has a much more interesting chocolate scene than New York does, and has for the last decade, right? It's just, sad to me as a New Yorker that, it's a great city, and, how much chocolate is there here? And I go to London and it appears to be everywhere. But how do you think that, the farm-to-table movement, and in this case, Julia and Andres, the sort of that gourmet food movement of, international travelers who've come back and brought this awareness with them back into the country. So how do you, Paul, how do you think about, how farm to table plays into this consumer interest in chocolate in these kinds of ways?
Wow. It's grown over the years as the whole dining experience has grown. More people have got more money to eat out in better restaurants. Lifestyle has changed, so we've got more disposable income. It filters right through. So it started with starters, main course. Now it's desserts and chocolate. And now people want more value for their money. So they're actually now looking into, right, okay, then what is single origin? What is organic? What is this? What's that? And they want to learn more. And in that respect, it's good for us as being the chocolatiers, because now we can experiment more. We can show our skill and then go straight to the farmer and say, right, okay, we want just this batch of chocolate. Can you supply us just with this? And then blend how we want, and then the end product to give to the consumer.
Right. So, Julia, I mean, I think of Colombia, I think of arepas. I don't, and I got to tell you, arepa con huevo on the side of the road at 6 o'clock in the morning with trucker coffee, like one of the great experiences in my life. And, I get the sense that, in Bogota, there's a very, very rich, very, very modern food culture. I mean, is that playing into how people are thinking about chocolate in Colombia as well? I mean, you have a culture of consuming hot chocolate. It's, probably more developed in Colombia than most other places in South America. So how does this work for you domestically?
Yeah, well, chocolate is not going as far or as good as it's going in England, as you say. Like, it's first England, and then we have some other countries in Europe, and then Colombia is not working a lot on like indulgency or high value chocolatery. It's more the hot drink we have every day. I had my hot chocolate this morning, as every Colombian. And so our consumption is always very high, but it's because of the hot chocolate that is the most important thing in the morning.
Okay. And Andres, I was in Guayaquil. I had some fabulous food when I was there, including going to a restaurant where we had a tasting menu and everything had cocoa in it or cacao in it in one form or another. How does this question about origin and sustainability, transparency, and things like that, what is the average consumer in Ecuador think about chocolate in those regards?
Well, here the average consumption in Ecuador is very low in terms of chocolate, but I believe it's becoming more and more aware to people, especially through restaurants. There's a lot of movement in terms of cuisine here, and we're cooperating with 3 restaurants directly here, because at the end, these restaurants want to show diversification of the bean, of the product they can make, to really, educate consumers on how diversified cocoa can be, and I think these new chefs, okay, which are not chocolate makers, but chefs, they really want to educate the Ecuadorian consumer and the Ecuadorian palate to understand what we have domestically, as a product. So I think that wave is beginning here, and I think it's a positive thing.
Good. So we're getting towards the end of the half hour. It is just like boom, spun by. And what I want to do is just ask one final question that the three of you can answer however you'd like to do. And that's the question about the reports, right? So if you were filing a report for legal purposes, it probably needs to be reviewed. It may be some sort of auditing or some sort of certification. How important is auditing and certification by third parties, right, for what it is that you're doing? For you as a company, number one, and number two, for your clients. So Andres, let's start with you, and then Julia, and then finally Paul. Where does the role of certification and auditing play in your reporting world?
Well, I think so far certifications for the farmers have really failed in terms of what's the benefit that you can get it from. I think right now for a farmer it involves a larger cost and no benefit in terms of financially benefit. I'm thinking, and when you're thinking in a small farmer trying to reach and get that opportunity, and ask them to spend more than they should, I just think that's not fair. So I think that there is a more transparent effort that the certification or whoever needs to make it in the chain needs to really reach out to understand that benefit is reaching everyone, not everyone. I mean, not just the consumer. So I will see it like that in those terms.
Okay. So Julia, how about for Lucre chocolates?
Yeah, well, I agree with Andres, but I'm going to talk more about certifying the report. So for us, more than certifying a report, it is very important that we are working on the B Corp certification. That besides auditing a report, it audits the processes and the people inspiration and the involvement of every single worker in the company in the triple impact. So we have been deeply working with all our workers. We have more than 2,000 in Colombia, and with all the families that we buy cocoa from more than 12,000 farmers in Colombia. And so we want to go farther and go to the process and to feel everybody involved in the process.
So I want to thank you all for joining us here today for this panel session on sustainability reporting from the farm to the factory to the artisan workshop. I want to especially thank my guests here today, Andres Guzman from Ecuador, Julia Ocampo from Colombia, and Paul Wayne Gregory from the United Kingdom. My name is Clay Gordon. I want to remind everybody that to take advantage of the Confectionery Live platform, go connect with the speakers. If you have questions, follow up with us. I have some documentation that I'm happy to provide in PDF form. If you connect with me, send a message to me, ask for this documentation, I will be able to get it to you. So please reach out if you have any questions. This is part of what the platform is for. It's not just listening to the presentation, it is the engagement that we all have with each other. I want to make sure that everybody takes advantage of this and can continue the conversation for the next year. It's just not for January 23 and January 24. And with that, I also want to point out that in the January issue of International Confectionery Magazine, there is an article that I wrote for my visit with Hacienda Victoria last October. I believe it's in the September 2022 issue of International Confectionery Magazine. I was in Colombia talking about the work that one of Lucre Chocolate's partners does in Colombia, talking about many of the issues we spoke about today. And so go and find those articles. Become a subscriber if you're not already, right? And take advantage of everything that International Confectionery has to help you get your business done. And with that, thank you, everyone. My name is Clay Gordon. I am the technical editor of International Confectionery magazine. It's been my pleasure to help moderate this panel for you today.